What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another lineup review video, breaking down a few lineups, mine and a few of the subs lineups from week 13. A little bit late on this video. Obviously, we had the 2-game Monday slate and then a Tuesday night game, which is going on right now as I'm recording this. So a little bit later, I'll take these on a Monday, but it's going to be a Tuesday night / Wednesday morning release. So hopefully you guys still find this useful a little bit later in the week, but we're going to hop right into it. Now, this is my main lineup over on FanDuel. I mentioned that I liked Kirk Cousins more over on FanDuel, liked the price more, and just the way that the stacking kind of worked out over there. So this was my main lineup on FanDuel. My DraftKings main lineup was an Aaron Rodgers lineup. Then I brought it back with Miles Sanders, so I was happy to show my FanDuel lineup rather than that one this week. Talking about this, I like the way this lineup came out a little bit more. The other lineup obviously didn't do too well. Overall, it was a pretty bad week for me. Really, pretty much bricked everywhere. Didn't really have, obviously, a lot of defenses that went off. I didn't have any Patriots defense. I obviously, in this screenshot, you can tell I went with the Chargers defense. So same game, but just the other side of it. And I'm surprised they even came away with 0. That was a miracle for me. But let's get right into it. This is my main line. Decided to double stack Kirk Cousins. The way I feel about the whole Kirk Cousins situation, and I guess now that we're at week 13, these feelings can kind of just be pretty redundant week on and week through week. But for example, like Kirk Cousins, the way I feel about when I'm stacking him is like I want Jefferson and Thielen, just mainly because of the fact that I feel like if he's going to have a ceiling game, you can really get a lot of the production tied to those two alone. So obviously he threw 3 touchdowns, 2 of them went to Thielen and Jefferson. So I really like doing that just from that standpoint. I decided to bring it back with James Robinson in this one. Again, it's more of a situation where James Robinson's just a guy there for Jacksonville. If they were going to be able to keep it close at all, which they were, obviously this game went to overtime. I didn't really expect James Robinson to be, in an amazing spot, like game script wise. Like typically that would be a good way to when you're looking at a quarterback and stacking with 2 guys and then bringing it back with a running back. Typically, you would like for a running back to be in that optimal game script where they're up and the other team's forced to throw to catch up. And it kind of worked out that way, where Jackson was actually up in this game for a while. But I wasn't expecting that out of Robinson. Mainly the idea behind it was if Jacksonville was going to keep this competitive and keep it close, I really liked the idea that Robinson was going to be the guy that did that because he does so much for this offense. So it was between Robinson and Chark I think had like 6 DraftKings points. So I think he had like 5 FanDuel points because he had 40 yards and 2 catches, I believe. So either way, like I guess those were my 2 options, and luckily I decided to go with Robinson in this one. Myles Gaskin was my favorite play at running back of the week, and I still think he was the best play. Like you can see, he had 21 carries, only turned it into 90 yards, and he fumbled, but he also had only 2 catches, but he turned that into 51 yards. Couldn't find the end zone, which is a major bummer, but I mean, clearly you weren't going to find another guy in this price range that was going to touch the ball 25 times. I think he had like 4 targets. So, combined opportunities, he had 25 opportunities. You just weren't going to find that in this price range, especially on FanDuel. So I still think Gaskin was the best play of the slate, especially because he came at lower ownership than guys like Devontae Booker and Montgomery. Sure, Montgomery had the better game, and I still had a lot of Montgomery. I just didn't have him in this lineup. But yeah, I still think Gaskin I think was $700 cheaper. He was either 700 or 300. Now my math is all weird, but he was cheaper, a lot cheaper. He was either 5,500 or 5,900. I can't remember. But yeah, just too cheap, and for the amount of opportunities that you could really expect from him, still think he was a great play, even though he only got 13 FanDuel points. I think he ended up having 15 DraftKings points, so not a bad week, but obviously could have been better if he fell in the end zone. Allen Robinson was a core play of mine. Came in a lot at the ownership. I was totally happy with the ownership over on FanDuel. I think he had 70 yards at halftime, and he just disappeared in the second half. And it was really strange. If I was told that this game was going to have a 64 total at the end of it, I would say, wow, Allen Robinson probably had a good game. Like, even though Montgomery scored twice, that's only 14 points for the Bears. Like, I would be led to believe that Allen Robinson would have found the end zone or potentially had more yards, more catches, whatever. So kind of bummed by his performance. I still think he was a very strong play, and this was a game that I thought was going to shoot out. It did, but Allen Robinson just wasn't a major part of it. Ferkser kind of got lucky, entered the final drive of the game, or one of the final 2 drives of the game with 1 catch for 14 yards, finished with 5 for 51. Michael Pruitt scored a touchdown, and Michael Pruitt actually ended up scoring 2 touchdowns. One was on like a 25-yard reception. The other one, A.J. Brown fumbled it as he was, an inch away from the end zone, and Pruitt picked it up. So that game was just a major tilting game, honestly. We had Rashard Higgins touchdown. We had a Donovan Peoples-Jones touchdown. We had just a lot of not the typical, like, Cleveland put up 41 points, and Nick Chubb scored once, I think. Kareem Hunt didn't score. So it was just a weird game. I think Landry scored once, but other than that, like, we saw a Corey Davis touchdown. We saw 2 Michael Pruitt touchdowns. We saw Cameron Batson score, I think. Like, it was just a weird game. Even though that game put up 76 points, a lot of just weird points went around. Like, A.J. Brown didn't score. Ferkser didn't score. Derrick Henry didn't score. Very weird that game was. So even though a lot of people were on that game to shoot out, the ownership was actually surprisingly down on that game, which was odd because it was the highest implied total on the slate. But people were pretty much on the run game more so, I think. Henry was fairly popular. Chubb had some ownership. Hunt had some ownership over on DraftKings. But Tannehill and his stacking outside of Ferkser, but like Brown and Davis, they weren't very popular. Baker and Landry, they weren't popular. So it was a game that went off but didn't really go off in the expected direction. So that's kind of the reason why I like to target offenses that are very, not intertwined, but very condensed, I suppose. And Cleveland and Tennessee, they're not as condensed as other offenses on the slate, especially Tennessee. They obviously have Brown, Davis, they have Ferkser when he's going to be filling in for Jonathan Smith, they have Henry. So it's a little bit weird there, but Aaron Jones was one of my favorite plays of the slate. Got a little lucky with a 77-yard touchdown with, I think, like 5 or 6 minutes left in the game. But, sometimes you just got to take that and run with it. So this lineup wasn't even able to cash in most of the contests that I was in. I think it cashed in like 2 of the smaller contests that it was in. But overall, not too great. It's just one of those things where sometimes one little move, like Chargers D were 3,900 and Patriots were 3,700, and Patriots D went for 31 points. Chargers went for 0. So, like, just one of those things where defense, I really don't. I hate telling people this, like, because I feel bad, like, when I'm like, I don't know. But I just don't really put a whole lot of thought into defense. I just think it's genuinely very random, and you are better off just trying to guess or look for a low-owned option or whatever. So, obviously, like, the top scoring defense on the slate was only 3,700. So, obviously, they weren't, like, the optimal play. They were low. They were fairly low on. They had some ownership, but it just happens with defense sometimes. Like, I truly think, like, it's just so random that you are sometimes better off just playing game theory rather than like trying to predict that. And a lot of that game theory just comes with playing low-owned defenses and cheap defenses. So that was my lineup overall. I think it was something that was fine. Wasn't obviously would have liked a better day out of it, but I think Gaskin and Robinson kind of left some on the table. I feel like they could have had better games. And then obviously with the defense putting up a 0, while some had defenses going for 30 or 15 points. So that's it for my lineup. Let's move on to the subscriber is Tommy252. So this is it says he got second place. It was a winner take all contest. I don't know if he said how many people were in the contest. He didn't say how many people were in the contest, but a winner take all. It was actually a really good lineup. So it's a bummer that it was a second place finish in a winner take all. So that's a bummer. So hopefully you had another contest. But let's run through this real quick. Aaron Rodgers paired him with Devontae Adams and Robert Tonyan. And he said he didn't want to bring it back with anybody because he didn't feel confident in the Eagles. And then Discord on Friday or Saturday, I said this. I was like, if I'm stacking the Green Bay Packers, I really don't want to bring it back with anybody because they all suck. Wentz sucks. He's ruining this offense. They're just not good. They're not a good team. So bringing it back with somebody is, I get it. It's like a two-sided sword with the fact that, okay, if you have an Eagle, you're feeling good about this game really being forced into a spot where Green Bay has to keep the pace going, keep their foot on the gas and all that stuff. But sometimes, like, you just find yourself really just digging yourself into a hole because you're not playing good plays on the other side of it. I ended up talking myself into Miles Sanders after going in Discord and saying that I didn't really like him and stuff. And then Sunday morning we're on the show and said I actually like Sanders now just because I figured that if the Eagles were going to do anything, they would just try to get their running back, their probably their most talented offensive player, more involved in the offense. Wasn't the case. So overall, this is a very smart idea by you not bringing anybody back with the Eagles. I think it was a good move. Tanyan scored. Devontae Adams scored twice, so it's a really good stack there. David Montgomery against Detroit, strong play. Only 17% in this winner take all. Whatever contest this is in, keep playing with these guys because you have a nice little edge here with Montgomery only 17%. Adams only 17%. I assume Davis at 5% means you're the only one that had him. So that tells me that maybe 3 people had Adams or Montgomery. So unique little spot. I think you should probably stick with playing these contests because getting these guys at this kind of ownership is nice. Gaskin, strong play. Pittman, I think all of FTN really liked Pittman. Ended up being a T.Y. Hilton game, but Pittman still had a fine performance. Eckler was a guy that a lot of people at FTN were high on. I myself didn't love him, but I didn't think he was bad. I pretty much faded him in all my main lineups on DraftKings. Had some of him on FanDuel because he was cheaper over there, but overall he was a chalkiest running back on the slate based on my ownership projections. I don't know if he ended up finishing there. I know he was up there in some contests, but overall just liked other running backs in that price range. Aaron Jones, James Robinson, a lot of pivots. So I decided to go away from Eckler, but I still think he was a strong play. Like he brings such a unique floor and ceiling combo to him just because of how involved he's going to be in the passing game typically, and in a spot where they were going to fall behind, you could potentially look for more pass game production. But I think obviously with them just getting routed didn't help. So yeah, that's the lineup there. Jags D again, like this is a perfect example. He didn't have any Minnesota guys, played Jags D because they're cheap and they scored 14 points. Like defense is very unpredictable, so sometimes just looking for a team that is cheap and can just get you through the day without getting really blown up goes a long way. So perfect example where you can either roster the Patriots D and get 31. You can roster Jags D in a spot where people liked Minnesota, but even so, like playing a cheap Jags D when you don't have any Minnesota Vikings makes some sense here, and it just really basically you're getting a cheap defense and it allows you to pay up elsewhere. But if you pay up for, let's say, I think the top defense was like Miami. I don't know what they finished with, but I'm assuming it wasn't all that great. It was kind of a weird game, so maybe they were fine. But again, like, are you really feeling great about paying up for Miami defense when you could have gotten 14 from the Jags or 31 from the Patriots? Like, no. So obviously, that's where the idea of just paying down and looking for variance to go in your way at defense really pays off. That's why I will never pay up for a defense unless something weird happens where I just think it's a good spot, or if I have the money. Like if I have the money and I really like the lineup elsewhere, there's no upgrades I can make, then I don't mind paying up for the defense. But a lot of times you're gonna say, okay, oh man, I wish I had $800 here. So if you have like a $3,500 defense on DraftKings, like you can go down $500-600 whatever and get a nice upgrade. So that is one thing about defense. Overall though, really like this lineup. Double stacking with Rodgers is smart. Like again, when you're playing Rodgers, you're hoping that he throws 4 touchdowns, hoping that he throws 3 touchdowns minimum. So obviously, you're not going to expect Devontae Adams to catch all of those. So I like double stacking with Rodgers, and it was a good call to not bring anybody back with him. Corey Davis was a really good play. I had some interest in him, but I ended up being off of him. Like in my Tannehill lineup, I had Brown and Ferkser. So good call on Corey Davis. Very good play there. And overall, I like this lineup. It's a bummer that you finished second in a winner take all, but like I said, hopefully you have this in other contests, and I assume it would have done pretty well. So, all right, moving on to the next lineup. This is by a pretty active sub in the Discord. No pressure, so thanks for sending this in. He actually obviously cashed this one. Yeah, more than min cashed it. This was a 153 max, he said. And then on the 2-game Monday slate, he turned 50 cents into 1,500. So big return on investment there for no pressure. So congrats on those 2 back-to-back solid days. And let's see if we can break down this lineup. Okay, so right off the bat, I can already see one thing I really like. Landry and Davis, that mini correlation, that mini combo. Love that. Aaron Rodgers paired him with Tanyan and Adams. Decided not to bring it back with anybody. Smart move. Pay down with the Bengals defense, even though the Bengals defense is literally like just stab yourself in the eyes. They're so bad. Like, it doesn't matter. Just roster them. They get you 3 points. They make you through the day. you're fine. Like, sure, it's not the same effect as like getting 31 from the Patriots, but most weeks we're not going to see a team have a pick six and a punt return for a touchdown and a ton of sacks and turnovers. So most weeks the top scoring defense will be around 15 points, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. So if you get 3 based on saving a ton of money, like, you're going to be able to make up those points elsewhere. Carson was a really strong play. I mentioned in my article, if you didn't have interest in Russell Wilson in the passing game, it made a lot of sense to have interest in Carson, because either way, like, it's just such a good matchup. And it didn't even turn out to be a good spot. Like, they didn't really turn out to be a good outcome for Seattle's offense. They scored 12 points. They looked very bad. They obviously lost to the Giants, so that's not ideal. But I think it was a spot where you kind of wanted to have interest in one side or the other. So it was a cheaper way to get exposure to what we thought was a good offense and a good matchup. And B, you were probably hoping to get a good game script out of Carson. Didn't necessarily get that, but you got 20 points from him at 6,300. I think that's probably cheap for a guy like Carson on a week where he's going to get that regular usage. So I like that a lot. And Eckler, already talked on him a little bit. So Kiki QT, that's a tough name for me to say, but he's a guy I want to talk about real quick. I think he was a good play. He was one of the best point per dollar plays in my projections. I got myself off of him. It was just very popular. And obviously it worked out here. He had a 60-yard catch, I think, either 50 or 60, maybe, I don't know. It was a long catch in the first quarter. So there, obviously, he had a nice little floor right off the bat, 5 or 6 points right off the bat. And the reason I was off him is just he was just too popular. So I only wanted to play him in stacks. And then when I did stack Watson in my main FanDuel, in one of my 3 main FanDuel lineups, I went with Cooks and Akins. So QT was interesting because he was obviously very cheap, and we knew he was going to be the second wide receiver in the offense, but he was still a lot less owned than Brandon Cooks was. So I didn't mind the play there, but I personally faded it myself. Obviously, it worked out here, and I mean, it was a good spot for this offense in general, where you could get a lot of pieces that you kind of just knew were too cheap because of Fuller was gone. So don't mind that play whatsoever. Like I said, I really like the Landry and Davis pairing, but yeah, the only thing I really said is, like, Eckler and QT were just guys myself that I were off of because of ownership. QT got there, Eckler didn't. It's just gonna happen some weeks, but I just kind of have a rule of thumb where if cheap wide receivers that typically are, either volatile or just don't have much of a ceiling, I typically just fade those guys. I actually think QT's ceiling was fine, but he was a guy that I thought was a little bit more volatile than some other guys on the slate. So that's why I decided to fade him. But again, when guys are just too cheap for their potential role, I get playing those guys at certain chalk. So I like this lineup. Like I said, I like the Landry and Davis, a little mini correlation, like getting a piece of that Seattle offense in a fairly cheap way with Carson and at low ownership. So overall, and also one other thing to point out is playing guys that are a little bit chalkier, like Eckler, like QT, that you like. Obviously, he liked QT and Eckler because he put him in his lineup. But those guys it's easier to play those guys when you have low-owned plays like Carson, like Landry, like Davis. So overall, like I really like that he was able to sprinkle in some of the cheap value chalk guys that he liked and still get really high upside builds with a little bit lower owned guys. So overall, very strong lineup. Like that one a lot. Heading over to the next one here. This one is SGIF. I don't know how to say his name. It's either one word that I just can't try to pronounce. I tried to pronounce it on stream one time and I couldn't do it. So I'm going with SGIF. If that's not right, I apologize. But he sent in this lineup, and we were having in-depth talks on Booker and Montgomery. I don't know if he was in it or not, but we were talking about it for like ever on Saturday morning or Sunday morning and Saturday night. So he went with the Goff, Cup, and Wood stack. I think that was a very good idea. I didn't really like Goff myself because normally I just hate Jared Goff. Is just a thing of mine. But overall, Cup and Woods were too cheap. They were definitely underpriced. They were 2 guys that were cash game viable. Obviously, you can see they did have some ownership in this one. Let me see if he mentioned what contest it was. Single entry lineup. And he didn't say the contest. But yeah, overall, pairing Goff with those 2 guys did make a lot of sense because of the fact that you were getting 2, honestly, cash game type receivers that were just underpriced, and you just pair them with the quarterback. Now, if you told me that Goff was going to have 27 and kind of have a ceiling game for him. I probably would have been hoping for bigger games out of Kupp and Woods, but they surely didn't kill him here. So obviously Thielen was a guy I liked a lot. He was a core play for me. Um, I guess we probably could have looked for a little bit more, but 21 out of Thielen isn't horrible by any means. So it, wasn't the end of the world, but again, probably wanting a little bit more. Gaskin like to play Eckler, a common theme. We've talked about him a few times. Devontae Booker. So Devontae Booker was my least favorite out of Gaskin and Montgomery and Booker. Out of those three, I liked Booker the least. And then on Sunday morning, I even brought Jonathan Taylor into the discussion and said I like Taylor more than Booker. It basically just came down to the fact that Booker was going to be popular, just like all these guys are going to be popular. So it's not like that was a big key factor. But out of all the guys that were going to be popular, Gaskin, Montgomery, Jonathan Taylor, we hadn't seen Booker in that role yet. We've seen Gaskin in a role that we could expect. We've seen Montgomery, obviously. We knew what we were going to get out of Montgomery, the role-wise. Jonathan Taylor, a little bit more of a question mark. I guess Gaskin was a little bit of a question mark, but I didn't think so because no one else was active there. So it was like him and Patrick Laird. So out of that, Booker was the least, I guess, concrete role. The guy with the concrete role there. They used Richard. They used the passing game a ton, obviously, and they fell behind too, so that didn't help. But overall, I think Booker shouldn't have been the same price as Montgomery and Gaskin and those guys. Now, I think Montgomery was too cheap. I think Taylor was probably fairly priced, but he had some risk to him, and I think Gaskin was too cheap. So I don't think it was necessarily Booker's fault that he was the same price as those guys. Like I get why they priced Booker at that price, but with Montgomery being too cheap, Booker was probably fairly priced, while Montgomery and Gaskin were just too cheap, and they were definitely safer plays. So I ended up liking those guys more, but I still got the reason for liking Booker. He had been a fairly explosive player, honestly, throughout the year. So don't mind that at all. That was just my reasoning for being on Gaskin and Montgomery, and then even Jonathan Taylor in that spot on Sunday. So that was the reasoning for me there. Seahawks D, that was a pretty common theme for like throughout cash games and stuff like that. So I think they were fine. They were probably a little bit chalkier than I would have liked, but can't really fault anybody for playing a defense against a backup quarterback. And like I guess we could go and like look for upgrades he could have made here by paying down, but like the only one that pops out is like Eckler going up to like Robinson or Jones or whatever. But Eckler was still a good play. So that's kind of the situation with this lineup. Overall, I like it. Bummer that didn't cash, but again, I like the idea of when a play that the public is on, or when the play that in general a lot of people are going to be on, by just attaching something to that or pivoting off of it. Like, so let's just talk about it real quick. Kupp and Woods, either someone could say, okay, I'm going to play one of these guys, and a lot of people just played one of them as like a one-off receiver, and they ended up both being very popular. So clearly this was a spot where they were both good plays if the public was on both of them. So if the public is on two receivers, if there's a spot where the public is on two receivers at 25%, obviously this contest has over 3,000 people, so it's a big contest. And if there's a spot where Kupp and Woods are both going to be 25% owned, and the quarterback is going to be 10% owned, like that just doesn't add up. So I really like that play. You shouldn't. I get that Woods and Kupp are underpriced, but so is Goff. I mean, Goff is what, 5,800. So this is actually a very good play, and that's a good thing to think about. Like, say there's a spot where there's a super chalky running back. Let's say Eckler, for example. I guess it's not really a good example, but let's say Devontae Booker, for example. He's gonna be a fairly popular running back, but nobody wants anybody on the other side of it. Like, obviously, we're not going to stack Sam Darnold. Obviously, we didn't really want to stack Cam Newton. But if there's a chalky running back, like using him in a run as a run back with a stack, like obviously it's going to help correlate well. And if one side of those kind of coins get to their ceiling, like let's say your running back in that matchup gets to his ceiling, good chance that the other side's going to correlate as well. So whenever you can find pieces that correlate that are low owned to chalk, it makes a lot of sense. And that's what this lineup did. Pairing Goff with Kupp and Woods is a very strong play, because obviously they were strong plays if we have 25% of the field on both of these guys. Like, it wasn't just one of them. It was both guys from the same offense on, the same team, two different guys, 25% owned. So obviously why wouldn't we like Jared Goff? Goff got there, so that's a really good play right there, and that's something to note. And one thing I think about is a few weeks ago when Mike Davis was like massive chalk, but nobody wanted to play. I think it was the Lions. No, it wasn't the Lions. The Falcons, maybe. The Falcons on the other side of it. I'm not really sure what offense it was, but like stacking around that running back, that chalk running back, is a good way to get different around that chalk. Like if you want to play a chalky guy, find ways to get unique around him. So let's say Thielen was going to be mega chalk, and it kind of worked out that way in this stack as well. Like we saw Thielen and Jefferson pretty popular, and Cousins didn't have that ownership, and that doesn't add up. Like how are we going to expect Thielen and Jefferson to be good plays without Cousins being a good play? And obviously, I thought Thielen and Jefferson were both good plays this week. So in certain lineups, you should be taking stabs on triple stacking those guys, or and that's what he did here with Goff, Kupp, and Woods. So that was a very good play, very strong play. Trying to think of run backs there. I mean, I know Drake scored and Hopkins scored, but again, like when you're stacking this game up, you're getting cheap access to a pretty obviously big game. This game popped off, so when you go to the Cardinal side, it gets pretty expensive. So like, what are you gonna do? Stack up Dan Arnold there? Sure, he scored a 16-yard touchdown, but wasn't really a good expectation for Darren Arnold. So I like the pairing here. It's a very strong play, and that's something to note going forward. So a lot of times you can think of good plays or think of good pivots just by analyzing popular plays. So if you're going through the chalk at each position, you can go, okay, Anthony Ferguson. How do I either find a way to play him in a unique way, or how do I fade him? If you fade Anthony Ferguson, going to a guy like Corey Davis was a very good option. The second wide receiver on the offense, fairly cheap, and going to be low owned. Or you can pair him with Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill wasn't too popular at all. Or you can pair him with a Brown. You don't always have to do that with a chalk. It's not always necessary, but it's a good way to do it, and it's a good way to get unique lineups. And especially if you're gonna find yourself like in a fairly chalky lineup, like let's say, okay, so we have Cook, we have Kupp, Woods, Ferguson, Booker, Gaskin, Eckler, even Thielen. Like these guys are all popular, but I'm probably pretty confident that not a ton of people had the combination of Kupp, Woods, and Goff, just because of how cheap, how unowned Goff was. He was 10% owned, so probably 10% of people had that combination, or actually probably less, because I doubt all 10 or 11% of these people are stacking up both of these guys. So while you're playing some chalk, you're getting a unique way. You're playing it in a unique way because of the fact that you found a way to correlate that and in a unique way. So overall, well done on that build. I think that's all of the lineups for today. Let me double check. Yep, that's all the lineups for today. So we had 4 lineups, 3 subs, and mine. Again, a little bit shorter of a video this time because we're on a little bit of a weird schedule with the double Monday night games and then the Tuesday night games. So appreciate you guys tuning in. If you want to get your lineup sent in next week, just DM it to me Sunday night, Monday morning, or whatever. We're going to do this again. We have basketball coming up in 14 days as of recording this. So it's the 8th when I'm recording this. So 14 days away, we have NBA basketball. Super pumped for it. Fast Eddie Fear already has a video up on talking about some secrets of DFS. And it's cool because now we get a chance to talk about basketball without necessarily only talking about plays. Like I know if you guys have watched these videos over the past 3 weeks, over a month, you realize that I like talking about more things other than just why people are good plays from like the sports side of things. Like a lot of times good plays come from the fact that it's not even sports related. It's like game theory and strategy and all that stuff. So it's a good chance to kind of consume some NBA content that revolves around strategy, game theory, all that kind of stuff, because when it's game day or when we have a game or slate that night, things get pretty hectic, as you all know, in the NBA. So it's a good time to analyze and digest some of that content. So great video by Eddie. It's only 6 minutes, and he's going to have a series of it. So it's going to be short and pretty easy to consume. So make sure you guys are heading over to our YouTube channel where you can check that out. This will also be on the YouTube channel, I believe, on Wednesday. So if you guys are watching this on the YouTube, please give it a like, a subscription, or a subscribe over on YouTube. I appreciate it. The more likes this get, the more often I can keep the lights on. So I appreciate it, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you guys next week.